Hello, everyone. My name's Henrietta Tan. I'm the Engagement Manager at Standards Australia. I'm responsible for the building and construction, water and waste and timber sector. Today, we're going to be looking at the changes to the plumbing and drainage standards, NZS 3500, with our special guest, Tom Roberts. There'll be a Q&A afterwards via Slido, and the number for Slido is 3157 348. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and recognise the continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. It's worth commenting on our disclaimer. Please note that this is just general information and is not formal advice. We recommend you seek professional advice and consult a copy of the full publication, which can be accessed via our store or any of our distributors. It's worth also mentioning our distribution partners. So we have Master Builders, HIA, we have our store, of course, SAI Global and Tech Street. So you can access standards via all of our distributors. Our presenter today is Tom Roberts. Tom is the Director for Global Plumbing, Mechanical and Gas Fitting with the International Code Council. And prior to this, he was the Director responsible for the Plumbing Code of Australia with the Australian Building Codes Board. Tom has been a long-serving member of WS14 Committee responsible for the NZS 3500 series. I think now it's just time to hand over to you, Tom. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Great, thanks Henrietta. Thanks for a kind introduction and thanks to Standards Australia for having me. Welcome to the Standards Australia presentation for the 2021 edition of the 3500 series. So during this presentation, I'll give you an overview of the changes to the 2021 edition across all 5 parts of the 3500 series. So I'll jump straight into it. There's a lot to get through, and I'll start with 3500 Part 0. So Part 0 hasn't been updated since 2003, and during the years since it was published, the main parts of the series have been updated twice, in 2015 and 2018. This left several defined terms being listed in the main parts of 3500 that were not included in Part 0. And this resulted in misalignment between the parts in the series and the potential to cause confusion in industry. The revision to Part 0 consolidated the defined terms located in each of the parts of the 3500 series, and a review of existing definitions was also undertaken with new definitions added where new technology or practices were introduced. Also, some defined terms were duplicated into Part 0 from the National Construction Code and from the NZS 6400 for water efficient products. This was done to ensure the terminology in Part 0 remains accurate and a standalone document. On definitions, so Standards Australia, in partnership with the Australian Building Codes Board, has produced an online dictionary of construction terms for the building and plumbing industry. So this dictionary combines terms from and definitions from the National Construction Code, 3500 Part 0, and Handbook 50, the Glossary of Building Terms. The online dictionary aims to assist industry, government, and consumers to understand the range of technology used to describe the same or similar terms across Australia. And this dictionary can be accessed at constructiondictionary.com.au. So references to product standards for manufacturing, testing, and certification of plumbing products were common for 3500 Part 1, Part 2, and Part 4. However, there's a few issues with this. When 3500 calls up a secondary standard, such as a product specification, it locks in the addition of the product specification that was current at the time that 3500 was published. As 3500 runs on a 3-year amendment cycle in alignment with the National Construction Code, the documents called up cannot be changed for that 3-year period. So this is an issue for standards for plumbing products that are regularly developed or amended and called up by the Watermark Certification Scheme. These changes to standards are not tied to a 3-year amendment cycle like the National Construction Code, And this means that what's used for watermark and what's referenced in the standards can quickly become inconsistent. So this revision, the references to product specifications have either been deleted from the clauses or relocated to an informative note to ensure that alignment between the installation standards and the requirements for the watermark certification scheme are there. On the backflow prevention, so in 2019, the Plumbing Code of Australia moved a number of public policy matters relating to backflow prevention from 3500 Part 1 into the Plumbing Code of Australia. So in 2021 edition of Part 1, this duplicated content from the standard and the PCA was removed. So now all the information is contained in the Plumbing Code of Australia. The information that was contained in Appendix F, such as figures for the installation of backflow prevention devices, they were relocated to Section 4, and now there's a single section in 3500 Part 1 for backflow prevention devices. The revision to NZS 3500 Part 4 also sought to remove duplicated requirements for heated water temperature control. In the 2019 edition of the PCA, heated water temperature control provisions were elevated from Part 4 into the PCA, similar to backflow. Duplicated requirements between the Plumbing Code and Part 4 have now been removed. So if you're looking for the backflow prevention or heated water temperature control requirements, you'll find them in PCA 2022. On the wet wells, so there was a range of allowable materials listed in 3500 Part 2 and Part 3 for prefabricated wet wells or the construction of wet wells. However, these materials have not been updated since 1990. Today, prefabricated wet wells are made from a variety of modern materials, including high-density polyethylene, polypropylene, and PVC, which were previously not recognised by the standard. The revision to Part 2 and Part 3 has increased the range of materials that can be used to construct wet wells and now captures all these modern material types. Drains on unstable soils. So previously there was no provisions or guidance provided on how to install a sanitary drainage system on sites with unstable soil classifications. So in the 2021 edition of 3500 Part 2, guidance information has been included for the design and installation of flexible joints in sanitary drainage systems. The committee considered including deemed to satisfy provisions rather than guidance. However, the guidance was ultimately considered to be the best solution. As there are a number of variables which need to be considered when building on unstable sites, a number of methods are available to minimise the damage to the pipework, and guidance was determined to be the best solution to ensure that the most appropriate solution is adopted for the site-specific conditions. The use of flexible joints are just one available solution that can be considered to address the issues of unstable soils. As this appendix is guidance and there are no deemed to satisfy provisions to comply with the Plumbing Code of Australia, a performance solution is still required for unstable soil classifications. For venting, the existing technical installation requirements contained in the 2019 edition of NZS 3500 Part 2 did not reflect current industry knowledge and installation practices for both air admittance valves and pressure attenuating devices. This project amended the requirements for AAVs and pressure attenuators to ensure that the standard reflects common industry installation practices and provides improved levels of safe ventilation performance when using the AAVs and pressure attenuators. AAVs, the change here was pretty minor. There was a lot of clarifications and intends to reduce any chance of non-compliant installation through misinterpretation. For pressure attenuators, this was a bigger change and will enable more flexible and efficient application for the installation of these types of products. Penetrations and steel frames. These requirements, the requirements for penetrations and steel frames was inconsistent between NZS 3500 Part 1 and 4 and the Building Code of Australia. So this is causing confusion in the industry where there's two sets of requirements and different requirements that apply to a building. The key area of alignment related to the requirements for penetrations in metal framework, including the size, the number, and the placement of service penetrations. These revisions ensure that the requirements for the penetration in steel frame construction are consistent with the BCA and the National Association of Steel Framed Housing or NASH standards. Jointing methods. There were inconsistencies in the provisions for jointing methods for plastic pipeworks in NZS 3500 Part 1. So there are 3 specific installation standards for the installation of plastic pipes: NZS 2033 for PE, NZS 2032 for PVC, and both of these standards were referenced in 2019. However, NZS 3690 for ABS was not referenced, even though the product specification was. The requirements for jointing plastic was reviewed, and the 2021 revision now directs plumbers to the relevant installation standards for the joining of PE, PVC, and ABS. And the standard also provides the appropriate jointing methods for these through these 3 installation standards as well. Separation distances. So AS 3000, otherwise known as the wiring rules, states that wiring shall maintain a separation distance of not less than 25 millimeters between any above ground gas or water piping. This minimum specification distance is consistent with 3500 Part 1, but it wasn't with 3500 Part 4. So Part 4 specified a minimum separation distances of 100 millimeters between electrical services and heated water pipes. So this is an obvious problem, and it arises when an electrician installs the wiring within 25 mil to 100 mil of a heated water pipe, and generally after a plumber has completed the heated water service installation. So in that instance, or that example, the electrical work would be compliant, however the plumbing would not. A review of the separation distances between the gas standards, the electrical standards, and the plumbing standards has resulted in a revision to 3500 Part 4, and aligns the separation distances between all the above ground services, and all the service installation standards are now consistent. Pipework marking. So another change for pipework, and it relates to these marking requirements. So the revision for 3500 included requirements around the marking of pipes in commercial buildings. This was an outcome that resulted from public consultation, where it was identified that there would be merit in reviewing the marking requirements for commercial pipework. So the revision will ensure that 3500 series provides clear and consistent requirements for pipework labelling in commercial buildings to ensure that the risk of pipework misidentification is minimised. And this really highlights the value of the feedback received through the public consultation period. Vacuum drainage. So NZS 3500 Part 2 in Section 16 covers the design and installation provisions for vacuum drainage systems. So in this section, it was first introduced in 2019 edition, and unfortunately there are several small errors that are included in the final text. As part of the 2021 revision of 3500 Part 2, minor amendments were undertaken to correct some of these errors. They're all mostly simple editorials or involve clarification of some informative guidance text. Dishwasher Connections. So 3500 Part 2 was also amended to review the requirements for commercial dishwashers. So the principal area of change here was the addition of alternative connection methods to the sanitary plumbing and drainage systems. So Part 2 allowed commercial dishwashers to connect to a disconnector gully within a maximum 10-metre discharge pipe. So this made the design of sanitary drainage systems difficult because other similar equipment, such as commercial kitchen sinks, were not constrained in the same way as the commercial dishwashers. So to resolve this, Appendix B was modified to allow dishwashers to connect to different drains, not just the disconnector gully, and now specifies the appropriate pipe size and length for each different type of connections. Other changes were made within the standard to reference Appendix B for consistency. So Rainfall Intensity. NZS 3500 Part 3 was reviewed to update the rainfall intensity data provided for both Australia and New Zealand. Rainfall intensity data is used by Part 3 to accurately design roof drainage and stormwater drainage systems. So the data is continually updated for the relevant government agencies, such as the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. This amendment did not see a large change in the rainfall intensities, and in some areas there was no change at all. However, it is important to ensure that the data provided in 3500 Part 3 is up to date. Another change in this area is the terminology used. The standard now refers to an annual exceedance probability, or AEP, which is the probability that a given rainfall total accumulated over a given duration will not be exceeded in any one year. So this removes the old terminology that was used, which was average recurrence interval, or ARI, and confusion around the years specified by ARI, such as the 1 in 100 year event. So Part 3 now references an exceedance factor of 10% rather than a 10-year ARI, or a 2% rather than a 50-year ARI. Heated water circulatory systems. So unfortunately, in industry, it's become common practice for heated water meters to be located in a central area on each floor of a multi-unit building. So this creates long runs of pipework from a circulatory system to the apartments and fixtures, resulting in an unnecessary wastage of water and energy. So to address this, the revision to 3500 Part 4 included some additional requirements for heated water from centrally generated and circulatory heated water systems. Primarily, the pipework is installed to individual dwellings and multi-unit developments. One of the key additions is the requirement for branch offtakes and water meter locations to be installed as close as practical to the individual dwelling that they serve. And also a recommendation for a maximum dead leg of 2 litres has been included. So this consideration hopes to go a long way to reducing the energy and water wastage. There's also a new appendix that's been included to help calculate the different pipe size, the different volumetric requirements around that 2 litres and the different pipe sizes and types that might result in that. Drains at grade. So part of the revision of 3500 Part 2 involved amending the requirements for drainage branches when installed at grade. So a lot of research was undertaken on residential installations as waste stranding and the sanitary blockages were regularly occurring. An existing building drainage system was replicated to allow observations around these issues, and with the replicated installation being compliant with the Plumbing Code of Australia and 3500 Part 2. This installation included a toilet which was installed upstream of 4 other fixtures connected to the drain using 45-degree junctions, all installed at grade. So the test results of that research showed that the full flush discharge from the toilets and the performance of that drain line carry was negatively impacted by each of those junctions in the drain. So during the full flush discharge, the water was found to travel up each of the 4 branch lines at grade, significantly reducing the flush volume and the carrying capacity of the waste test media. So this is stranding the solids and the paper. Stranding was also observed within the 45-degree junctions and it was caused by a redirection of flow of the wastewater. So a number of alternative inclination angles were tested to find the best solution. So through the physical testing and observations, the 15-degree inclination was confirmed to provide the best performance of all alternatives tested. So this angle is also common across international plumbing standards. After this research was concluded, a proposal was submitted to Standards Australia and some amendments were made in the 2018 edition of 3500 Part 2. In the 2021 edition, the relevant clauses were also again updated to provide consistency and clarity. The image on the slide shows an inclination of the junction and how it helps to retain the flush water and maintain the waste carry in the direction of flow. So these are 2 images of the main drain and branch drain connections. The image on the left has a connection at grade, whilst the image on the right shows a connection with a 15-degree incline. There are some exemptions to the inclination clause. It relates to the repairs and extensions for existing installations where it might be difficult to achieve. So where toilets are not connected upstream of the junction, where drain line carry isn't an issue, or where the main and branch drains are greater than 100 millimetres. The associated figures have also been updated to reflect this amendment and provide clarity and consistency across the clauses. Fire hydrants. So although this isn't a part of the 3500 series, another amendment that might be of interest is AS 2419 Part 1. So this standard specifies the requirements for the design, installation, commissioning and testing of fire hydrant installations. This amendment ensures that the requirements relating to fire hydrant installations are contemporary and reflect present and future risks within the built environment. As well as acknowledging the benefits of sprinkler systems, it introduces a range of requirements for high-rise buildings based on international standards. It limits the scope to buildings having an effective height of 135 metres, as well as some other limitations. Buildings over 135 metres present additional challenges to attending fire brigades, and there's implications on the design of on-site fire hydrants as a result of that. Appendix D contains information around buildings over 135 metres, but the Standards Committee wanted to defer developing prescriptive solutions until it's better understood how international standards may deal with these risks. Bushfire-prone areas. So it's also important to note that AS 3959 has now been referenced by the 2022 edition of the Plumbing Code of Australia. So AS 3959 contains requirements for construction of buildings in bushfire-prone areas. So 3959 also contains requirements for plumbing services, which unfortunately plumbing practitioners were often not aware of, as it was never referenced within the Plumbing Code of Australia. So this led to a lack of awareness of plumbing requirements, which were previously required under the Building Code of Australia via 3959. So as construction is continuing to expand outside of the major capital cities and metropolitan areas, it's important that plumbers understand the requirements for plumbing service installations in bushfire-prone areas. So the revision of 3500 series has included references to the National Construction Code to alert readers to these specific requirements. This will ensure that plumbing systems installed in buildings in designated bushfire-prone areas do not create an increased risk to the building, such as providing an entry point for flame and embers. So believe it or not, despite this presentation being on the standards that have only recently been adopted through the NCC 2022, Standards Australia and the WS14 Committee have already been busy developing the 2024 edition of the standard. So a 3-year amendment cycle for the 3500 series has been adopted to ensure the standard remains relevant and fit for purpose going forward, and future changes can be referenced in each continual edition of the National Construction Code. So to get an idea of what the committee's been working on, I'll present some general themes of the proposals that Standards Australia have received ahead of the next edition. So some of the projects being worked on by WS14 and Standards Australia include some minor changes to the backflow prevention requirements around atmospheric vacuum breakers, a new design and installation requirements for water urinals, and with the goal to prevent struvite buildup in the sanitary drainage system, which is unfortunately becoming a common problem in industry. So provisions for the installation of water-using appliances and requirements for wastewater discharge for any sort of miscellaneous appliances that the standard doesn't currently cover. Another project for the provision of for sites where there's more than one building connected to a sanitary drainage system within a single property, so multi-building developments. There's going to be the committee's working on installation provisions for rainwater tanks, as well as some new rainwater harvesting provisions to address current industry practices such as charged stormwater systems. There's also installation considerations for the use of polyethylene pipes in Northern Australia, and hoping to address some of the issues that are occurring when products that are maybe not appropriate to the right installation conditions, and providing guidance around how best to deal with that in those scenarios. And there's also going to be some requirements around the use of certain categories of flexible hoses. So changes to the 3500 series will be released for consultation to the general public later this year, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So if you have an interest in any of these areas, I strongly encourage you to review the draft and submit comments for consideration. So every comment that's received is really valuable to the committee and is considered. Each individual comment is also considered. So if you have any ideas, also if you have any future ideas for Failure 500 series, any gaps or improvements that could be made, I also encourage you to submit a project proposal to Standards Australia for consideration of the committee in future editions. So lots to get through, but I'll open up for some questions and hand back over to Henrietta.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. A lot going on there, lots of changes, and you've given us a really good comprehensive overview. So thank you. So yes, we do have some questions. We'll start with one from Brad. Was there any consideration for water meter location regarding unit metering for cold water also?
No, so for the change to 3500 Part 4, and really focused on reducing water wastage from dead water, where there's a relatively long run from the circulatory heated water system to the point of discharge, and trying to minimise that where possible. So it's very difficult for the stand to prescribe an exact location where those heated water meters or that pipe work can run, because there's a lot of site specifics to that. But it was really focused on that water wastage that can be a result of that. There wasn't any consideration around the cold water meter locations, but maybe that's a potential proposal for change for consideration in the future revision cycle.
Lovely, thanks, Tom. We've got a question for hot water. It was mentioned that meters are to be installed as close as practical to point of use or connection. Is this a normative or informative section of the code?
So the requirement for water meters to be installed as close as practical to the point of use or connection is a mandatory clause. It is a bit vague because it's very difficult to determine what isn't a practical solution due to the varying site specifics of different buildings. But it does provide that obligation on the installing practitioner to consider the length of pipe work and trying to reduce it where possible. The requirement of the guidance around that 2 litre volume of water wastage is guidance only. It's only a recommendation and is consistent with other requirements across other international plumbing standards as well, but it's only guidance only, as is the appendix that can be used to determine how, or depending on the pipe size and material, what's going to produce 2 litres of water. So that aspect is guidance only.
Fantastic, thanks, Tom. Question from Brad. Is the PE pipe change going to address the plethora of PEX systems being standardised?
No, I don't believe it will. I don't think there will be any issues there, but yeah, I'm not fully across all the standards being amended for PEX, so yeah, as far as I'm aware of the installation standards, there shouldn't be an issue.
Thanks, Tom. Question from Sheikh. The distance between electrical services and plumbing services mentioned 25 to 100 millimetres. Is it enough?
Well, that's a good question too. Maybe one posed better to the electrical committee, but what we've tried to do through this revision is make sure that both the electrical, the plumbing and the gas fitting standards all have the same separation distances. So 3500 Part 4 is just aligned with the requirements around AS3000, the wiring rules. So I would say it's enough based on all 3 different installation standards covering the same requirements now.
Thanks, Tom. Question from Matt around drains. Do drains at grade apply to all pipe sizes? For example, 100 junction or 100 by 65 junction. Does it apply to all new junctions?
So it does apply in very specific scenarios. There are exemptions to the clause as well, and one of those exemptions is existing buildings, where it's going to be quite difficult to achieve that 15-degree inclination, where you've got those fixed points in the existing drain. So it is all new installations or new buildings. Where you've got an existing building and you're doing a repair or replacement, it's not a requirement, and there's exemptions around that. For 100 by 65, it depends on the junction configuration and where that pipework is then being reduced. But if you think back to the principle and what the issue is, it is best practice to incline those junctions wherever you can, and depending on where you'd be reducing that from 100 millimeters to 65 millimeters, best practice would be to turn it up and try and prevent that water loss down each of those junctions and allow that drain line carry to continue in the direction of flow.
Thanks, Tom. Regarding the 2 litre hot dead leg, does this apply to all building classes?
So where this guidance note is included, it's for circuitry heated water systems. It's water. I guess it's one of those requirements that is very difficult to apply to all different buildings because there's so many different site-specific configurations of the heated water systems. So that guidance is specifically in the circuitry heated water system, so it does have a commercial flavour to it, but it is guidance only and really targeted to that system type.
Fantastic. We're getting a few more questions here, Tom. We had a question around reactive soil. Is all drainage and reactive soils required to have a performance solution? If so, that means every drain in my area.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. There are a lot of common industry practices around how to deal with unstable sites, but depending on the classification, it does change the likelihood of there being issues as well. So it is one of those issues that plumbers come across where it is very site specific. Literally the definition of site specific is the soil that's being built in. So it's always going to have those site specific considerations to it that need to be matched, and performance solutions are a really good way of achieving that, where you can look at, okay, well, here's the site specific issues that I'm trying to address, and here's the proposed solution that I'm working towards, and making sure that they both marry well, and the solution is going to meet the problem. There are no deemed to satisfy provisions for it, so it is guidance only. It's an informative part of the standard. So as guidance, it can be used to inform your performance solution, but because there's no deemed to satisfy provisions providing a complete solution, it is a performance solution each time.
Thank you. Question from Brad. Fire systems in domestic dwellings, will this be mandatory in some situations going forward?
At this point, no. The committee's not working on any project proposals in this space, but it might be a question that the fire-related committees might be able to answer in more detail than I could.
Yes, great. Thank you, Tom. Is Committee WS14 looking into moving away from fixture units to discharge unit, i.e. litres per second values for fixtures?
So this is a good question, and thanks to whoever put it in, because it is a topic very close to my heart. So the pipe sizing methods and the fixture units and discharge units are very old, and there's a lot of work being done both within Australia and internationally to come up with modern pipe sizing methods. There's a lot of research being undertaken, but at this point, we're not at a stage where that research will translate into a change to the fixed unit systems with ease. So it is something that the committee is keeping a close eye on, the research that's been happening, and there is a long-term goal to update 3500 and around the pipe sizing method, especially in the large or taller buildings where the systems are a little bit more complex. So it is something that the committee is hoping to work on in future revisions. At this point in time, we're not working on it, but it is an issue we're hoping to overcome in coming revisions.
Thank you. Another question. There also appears to have been some changes to installation requirements for hot water pipework in Table 8.2.2 regarding pipework within a slab. Can you explain the reason for this change?
That might be one that I might take offline and put together. So I think some of the questions that we don't get a chance to look at today, we'll consolidate and provide the advice to all the attendees. But that might be one that I take offline and think about a bit more.
Great. Thanks, Tom. I think we've got time for another couple of questions. I'll just check if we've got any more coming through. If you haven't asked your questions, now's your chance. All right. Question from Josh. Sanitary drainage installed in reactive soil requiring a performance solution. Does this same ruling apply to stormwater systems such as H1 or H2 soil classification?
So stormwater is a tricky one, especially when you're talking performance solutions, because in each different jurisdiction, stormwater is regulated in a different way. So in some states, it's regulated under plumbing legislation, and others it's regulated under building. Some states also have other requirements in their regs or in other codes that sometimes deal with this issue. In 3500 Part 3, for example, there are no provisions dealing with unstable soils. So, I'll provide a really high-level generic answer, which is generally yes, it probably would be a performance solution in most jurisdictions, because in 3500 Part 3 it doesn't provide those solutions for unstable soils.
Lovely. Thank you, Tom. I think we might have come to the end of our question. Oh, no, hang on. Okay, we've got one more question. Well, I'll just ask you one final question. This is from Michael. Are you looking at adding pot filler tap requirements over domestic stoves? I'm not sure if that's one you can answer now, whether that's one you'll need to take offline.
Yeah, so we haven't received any project proposals for that, but it has been a topic of conversation over the last few years. It has become a bit of industry practice. It is very common overseas to do this. I know there has been some discussions between both the electrical committees, the plumbing committees, and the gas committees around any risks associated with pot filling and what could go wrong, and how best to deal with that in the standards. But it isn't something that the 3500 committee is currently looking at, but it might be a really valuable proposal for a future revision as well, to really fine-tune those considerations and embed something into the standard in a future edition.
Lovely, thank you. So we'll be making this recording available. For those of you who've seen our previous recordings on YouTube, you can find this there. We'll also be sending a link to everyone that registered. So you'll be able to access this recording and the very comprehensive rundown that Tom's provided today. Tom, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you on behalf of the team for coming along today and providing this invaluable presentation and all the information on what is essentially a raft of changes to the 3500 series. So we really appreciate your time and your expertise in coming along and presenting.
Thanks for having me, Henry, and thanks, Stands Australia.
No problem, anytime. All right, well, we've finished in good time. I want to thank everybody who's registered. Thank you for your time, thank you for your attendance, and thank you also to those of you who've asked such great questions this afternoon. We really appreciate your engagement and for listening today. Thank you so much. So I think on that note, we'll let you all go and we'll see you next time. Thank you.